the reason why I asked about that was because I think that was one of the big wars maybe in the past 60 years that maybe Southeast Asia's experienced. And now we live in a world where we're experiencing two wars. And to understand what can play out in the coming decades, it will be useful to refer back to the past. I think that was where my interest was piqued. And in your book, The ASEAN Miracle, you talk about Southeast Asia being this miracle of peace, which is why I wanted to understand, how do we get here? It's like the fish in water analogy that David Foster Wallace talks about, which is that the fish that lives in water does not know that it's in water. Peace is a non-event, as you said. So when you're living in peace, you're not surprised. So I would like to maybe focus our attention on the wars that are happening now. There are two main wars now we see in the world. The first one is the war in Gaza. It's weird because we have a special relationship with Israel, but at the same time, we see, I liken it as what's happening in Gaza is to like the millennials Vietnam War. We're being exposed to very graphic imagery across the world through social media on how the war is playing out. So then my question would be then, what do you think are the obstacles to peace? Is there a way out for this?
Well, I mean, you're right, there are two ongoing wars now, the Gaza war and the Ukraine war. But I've been studying geopolitics for over 50 years now. And the big lesson I've learned is that wars are avoidable. But of course, wars are avoidable if you have wise and strong leaders who can make the right decisions to prevent wars. But quite often, and this is the tragedy about the West. In the past, it was the Western countries that had wise and strong leaders. Now, many Western countries have weak and ineffective leaders. So, for example, the Gaza war could have been avoided if, for example, the United States, which always says that it's in favor of a two-state solution, had worked harder to achieve a two-state solution. So that means that Palestinians would have had a state also. Maybe a somewhat demilitarized state because Israel is very concerned about security, reasonably so. But something could have been done. But unfortunately, you haven't had any American leaders strong enough. Only the United States is big enough, strong enough to persuade the parties, Israel and Palestine, to come together. But they failed to do so. And because they failed to do so, the wound continued to fester. And then when the wound continues to fester, you get an outbreak. That's what happens. And certainly we should condemn the Hamas for its killing of innocent Israeli civilians. That's completely unjustifiable and should be condemned,
We are sorry to interrupt you, but before we move on to the next point, we noticed that a lot of you are returning viewers who have not subscribed. If you've enjoyed our content, subscribing would mean the world to us. It's a small click for you, but it makes a huge difference for us. Thank you for your support.
But at the same time, you also have to ask yourself, could all this have been avoided if a bigger effort had maybe made to create a two-state solution? Similarly, in the Ukraine war, I also believe the Ukraine war could have been avoided. And here, surprisingly, the United States and the West had two eminent American statesmen who warned against the expansion of NATO, towards Ukraine. One was George Kennan, the man who actually was responsible for America's successful strategy in the Cold War, the containment policy. He advised strongly against NATO because he said this would alarm the Russians and trigger a negative reaction. There's a famous interview he gave to Tom Friedman, which I think everyone should read. And then also, Henry Kissinger wrote an article in 2014, 10 years ago, in Washington Post, suggesting a compromise formula for Ukraine, whereby, Ukraine would keep its independence and sovereignty, Ukraine could join the European Union, but Ukraine would agree not to join NATO, right? I mean, these are all sensible compromise proposals that were put forward. But unfortunately, there were no strong Western leaders who were capable of carrying out this advice, And indeed, in my last conversation with Henry Kissinger one-on-one in October 2022, about a year before he died, he clearly indicated to me in a very subtle way that the quality of mind of many Western leaders today is not what it used to be. And they don't have the capacity to do strategic long-range thinking in the way that the Churchills and Eisenhowers and all could do in the past. And I think that the deterioration in the quality of Western leadership is also one of the explanations for the continuation of wars in Gaza and Ukraine.
What do you guys think? Do you think he is right when he said wars are caused by weak leader? Please leave your comment below. We would love to hear from you.
Thank you for making it this far. If you like this video, you might want to share it with a like-minded friend. Thank you, and as always, stay blessed.